The region I selected to do this assessment on was Southeast Asia and Oceania. One thing to pay attention on throughout the presentation is Southeast Asia will be color-coded in the color red and Oceania in the color green. First, I looked with the physical geography, that being the way the countries were laid out in these regions, the landforms and bodies of water, and also the climate and vegetation of these areas. These things all impact the way this country runs because Southeast Asia is very close to Asia, which is China and the countries up that way. So Southeast Asia has had a huge influence from China and is thus able to have better interactions with the people of Asia and has a very similar culture to them. Oceania is a little different. It's an island nation, kind of in the middle of nowhere, as some would say, but it is greatly impacted also by both the US and Great Britain. That being that Hawaii is part of Oceania, but also part of North America as well. Great Britain was one of the people to colonize Oceania, but Oceania is also close to Southeast Asia, so again, those influences from Asia are there. Then I looked at the culture and history of this region. Specifically, first I looked at the colonization, immigration, and history that helped to build up the people living in these regions. Then I looked specifically at the culture of the people who live here, how the culture influences trade, and that kind of thing. Then I decided to look at religion. Religion first and mainly in Southeast Asia. I could not find as much information on Oceania for religion as I would have liked, so I focused in on Southeast Asia a bit more. There was the great beginning of Buddhism and Hinduism with that Asian influence from China, and now is mostly Islamic, but Islam is spreading throughout the region, and there are also small increments of Roman Catholicism throughout the region as well. After that, I looked at the population and how that is kind of distributed throughout and how that is all influenced. I looked first at Southeast Asia with how it is also a large and growing population, though the growth rate is slowing. I looked at the prediction for 2050 as well as some of the challenges and human well-being issues. Then I also looked at Oceania. Though it's a large area, it actually has quite a small population. I looked at some of the population patterns and also the human well-being. Then I looked at urbanization and development, looking at the overall average and some of the most urbanized areas in the region for both Southeast Asia and Oceania. And then I looked at some push-pull factors and how Oceania did it a little differently because of the way the country is broken up. Then I went to globalization, looking at Southeast Asia. A huge portion of the globalization is the migration out and people working in different areas from that region, sending money back home, which is how this country gets a lot of the money that they need for foreign exchange. Then Oceania is actually reorienting towards Asia, which again is that location thing with it being so close to Asia that the influence is there. There's also an impact from Europe, which comes from the early colonization from both Britain and the US, but also tourism. There's much tourism in this area, Sydney Opera House, and the beautiful beaches of Australia. So tourism is a huge contributor to the globalization of this region. Then we have the exports and trade section, which is kind of all your economics type thing, which also ties into globalization because with exports and trade, that requires communicating with other nations and sharing your goods with them. Again, tourism is huge for the economy of Oceania. Then I looked at the workforce working conditions for Southeast Asia. There was the feminization of labor, which is very neat to see and kind of cool, kind of sad, but it's good because the women are actually able to get out into the workforce, but sadly they are still overcoming the challenges of not having true equality. Oceania is very focused on extractive industries, and given that it is an island nation, you have a lot of fishing. So there is that stress and worry of overfishing, which would put the economy in a downward spiral. After that, I looked at the government, politics, and power type things. I looked into the government for Southeast Asia, with there being some pressures for and some against democracy, and also there being violent conflicts in the region. And then I looked at power and politics, specifically Southeast Asia with political freedoms, resettlement schemes, Oceania with divisions over democracy, and that most common division being democracy versus the Pacific Way. The role of women in government has become much greater in Oceania. Specifically, there is a trend toward equality, and the women are gaining more roles there. Then I looked at some of the challenges in the areas. For Southeast Asia, again, and Oceania, actually, there's the challenge of both climate change and coral reef bleaching as a result of climate change. Then I looked at the economic and political issues, being that trade can be a problem. Poor population is definitely a challenge for Southeast Asia, and economic development for Oceania. Then I looked at the population and gender issues, that being more specifically towards Southeast Asia, as things are beginning to even out in Oceania. Southeast Asia does face a great challenge, which HIV/AIDS, which also has then an impact on people wanting to have children, which again slows the birth rate, and that then impacts the growth rate. Overall, these regions were really, really neat to study. It's important to notice that in these nations that though they are so close together, they are quite different because of their background of colonization, and they still do impact each other, which is so cool to see.